There is a particular kind of silence that settles over a marina at night. If you have ever spent time on the water, you know it. The gentle rocking of boats against their moorings, the soft slap of small waves against fiberglass hulls, the distant sound of wind moving through rigging, a low metallic hum that some sailors find meditative and others find haunting depending on the circumstances. On the evening of April 4th, 2026, the anchorage near Hopetown in the Bahamas had that silence broken by something that nobody who was there that night expected. A woman named Lynette Hooker went into the Sea of Abaco, and she did not come back. What followed was not just a search. What followed was an investigation that is still active as of this telling. A missing person case that became something considerably more complicated. A story about a couple who had built their entire lives around the sea, around each other, around the kind of freedom that most people only dream about while sitting in traffic or staring at spreadsheets in fluorescent-lit offices. Lynette and Brian Hooker had walked away from all of that. They had chosen the ocean over the ordinary, and on that April night, in waters that a licensed boat captain, who was anchored directly beside their vessel, described as not particularly severe, Lynette Hooker vanished. Her body has never been recovered. To understand what happened that night, or more precisely, to understand why so many people who have followed this case are still asking questions that have not been publicly answered, you have to start not with the ocean, and not with the weather, and not even with the people involved. You have to start with a small mechanical device, a coiled cord, a piece of equipment so standard and so well understood in the boating world that most experienced sailors barely think about it consciously anymore. It is called an engine cutoff switch lanyard. And in the world of small motorized boats, it is the difference between a vessel that stops when its operator goes overboard and a vessel that keeps going. The difference between a tragedy that ends one way and a tragedy that ends another way entirely. Understanding this device, understanding its engineering and its legal purpose, and the very specific way it is designed to function is essential to understanding why what Brian Hooker told investigators about the night his wife disappeared has generated the level of scrutiny that it has. Let us begin there, with the lanyard, with the engineering, with the facts that are not disputed by anyone. An engine cutoff switch lanyard, which people who have never operated small boats commonly call a kill switch, is a safety mechanism with a history rooted in a very specific and very preventable kind of accident. Before these devices became standard, before they became required by federal law in the United States, small motorized boats occasionally became unmanned in the worst possible way. A driver would hit an unexpected wake, or lose their footing on a wet deck, or simply misjudge a turn, and they would go over the side, and the boat, with nobody at the helm and the engine still running, would continue moving. Sometimes in circles, sometimes in a straight line, away from the person who had just fallen into the water. The boat was going, the person was in the water, and the boat was not coming back. The device was invented to prevent exactly this. The engineering is straightforward in the way that the best safety solutions always are. There is a switch integrated into the motor's ignition system. There is a lanyard, a coiled cord, connecting that switch to the operator of the vessel. One end of the cord clips to the switch. The other end clips to the operator, to their wrist, to their life jacket, to their belt. Any point of secure attachment to the person who is driving. If that person moves too far from the motor, if they fall overboard, if they are ejected from the boat by a wave or a collision or any other sudden event, the lanyard pulls free from the switch, and the engine stops. Instantly. Not gradually, not after a few seconds. Instantly. The United States Coast Guard uses specific language about this device. The National Marine Manufacturers Association uses specific language about this device. Every boating safety organization that has ever documented how kill switches function uses the same specific language. The lanyard is worn by the operator. That word, operator, is not casual. It does not mean passenger. It does not mean the person who is not driving. It means the person at the helm, the person whose hands are on the controls, the person who is driving the boat. Because the entire engineering premise of the device is based on a single triggering event, the departure of the driver from the driving position. The driver falls overboard, the lanyard pulls, the engine stops, the boat stops, and the driver can potentially be recovered. That is what the device is for. That is the only thing it is for. United States federal law, specifically regulations enforced through the Coast Guard Authorization Act, requires engine cutoff switches on motorized boats under 26 feet in length that produce 3 or more horsepower and were manufactured after January 1st, 2020. This is not a guideline or a suggestion. This is federal law. It exists because people died in preventable ways before it existed. The legal requirement is specific about who wears the lanyard for the same reason the engineering is specific about who wears the lanyard, because the device only does what it is designed to do when the operator is wearing it. Now hold that information in your mind, because it becomes critical. Carly Ellsworth is Lynette Hooker's daughter. She spoke to CBS News about her understanding of how her mother and stepfather operated their dinghy, the small motorized boat they used to travel between their sailboat and shore. According to what Carly told CBS News, Brian typically drove the vessel. Brian was the operator. Brian was the person at the helm. Brian was the person the lanyard was designed for. What Brian Hooker told police, what became part of the official account shared by the Royal Bahamas Police Force, was that Lynette, the passenger, was wearing the kill switch lanyard when she went overboard. That Lynette falling into the water caused the lanyard to disconnect from the switch. That this caused the engine to cut. That the boat lost power when the passenger, not the operator, went overboard. This single detail, a passenger wearing a device specifically designed and legally mandated for the operator, is where a licensed boat captain named Captain Bill, who was anchored directly beside Brian and Lynette's sailboat, the Soulmate, on the evening of April 4th, 2026, had something very specific and very public to say. Captain Bill spoke on the record on the Brian Enton Investigates podcast. He is not an anonymous source. He is not someone repeating secondhand information. He was physically present in those waters that night. He knows those waters. He holds a captain's license. And when the account of the kill switch lanyard came to his attention, he addressed a specific technical reality publicly. His assessment, stated plainly, was that most outboard motors have a manual override, that the engine can be restarted without the lanyard. Stop with that for a moment, because this is where the engineering becomes important again. When a kill switch lanyard disconnects from the switch, the engine stops. That is the designed function. But on most modern outboard motors, that is not necessarily the end of the story. The lanyard disables the engine when it is pulled. It stops the running engine, but on most modern outboard motors, the engine can then be restarted by pressing the start button directly, without the lanyard needing to be reinserted into the switch. The lanyard is required to keep the engine running safely with an operator present, but the absence of the lanyard does not necessarily mean the engine cannot be started again. It means the safety mechanism is no longer engaged. It means someone could restart the engine and operate the boat without the kill switch protection active. Brian Hooker told the people he called after the events of that night, in a recorded phone call obtained by CBS News, that without power on their dinghy, he was unable to restart the engine, that he had no option but to paddle, that the dinghy drifted through the Sea of Abaco for hours, that it eventually washed ashore near Marsh Harbor sometime in the deep early morning hours, that he notified someone at approximately 4 a.m. on April 5th that his wife had gone overboard. Captain Bill's public statement addresses the specific gap between those two things, between the engine stopping and the engine being permanently inoperable, between the lanyard disconnecting and the boat being truly powerless. If the motor on their specific dinghy that night had manual override capability, which Captain Bill stated is the case on most outboard motors, then the engine cutting, when the lanyard disconnected, would not necessarily have meant the engine could not be restarted. Brian Hooker spent 4 years living full-time aboard the Soulmate. He and Lynette described themselves publicly as co-captains of their vessel. He told CBS News that there were certain jobs he did and certain jobs she did, because there was a big enough boat that it took 2 people to really run efficiently. 4 years of full-time sailing life, a decade of boating experience between them. A man who by his own description was deeply and thoroughly familiar with every aspect of the vessels they operated together. Whether the specific outboard motor on their specific dinghy that specific night had manual override capability is something investigators have not publicly confirmed. That is an important distinction, and it deserves to be stated plainly. The investigators hold the physical evidence. They have the dinghy, they have the motor. The answer to whether that particular engine could be restarted without the lanyard exists in the physical evidence that authorities possess. It has simply not been made public. What Captain Bill said, publicly, on the record, is that most outboard motors have that capability. A licensed boat captain who was anchored beside the Soulmate that night, saying that publicly is a documented statement of technical assessment from a person with both the credentials and the proximity to speak meaningfully to the question. Now, let us talk about who Lynette Hooker was, because she is not a supporting character in this story. She is the reason the story exists, and understanding who she was matters to understanding what her disappearance means to the people who loved her. Lynette Hooker was 55 years old. She was from Onstead, Michigan. She had, by every account from the people who knew her, given genuinely everything to the life she and Brian built together on the water. This was not a casual commitment. This was not a vacation hobby. Lynette quit her career. She sold her house. She gave away everything she owned. Those last two things are not characterizations or summaries. They come from a text message Lynette sent to her friend Marn Stevenson, a message that was obtained by CBS News. She and Brian had been sailing together for more than a decade, under the social media name The Sailing Hookers, with imagery and content built around sea turtles and sunsets and the particular domestic joy of baking cinnamon rolls in a solar oven aboard a sailboat named, with a kind of deliberate romantic intentionality, Soulmate. Her mother, Darlene Hamlet, told the Associated Press that Lynette had been around lakes, boats, sailing, and swimming her entire life. This was not someone who was unfamiliar with water. This was not someone who was inexperienced around boats. Lynette had been in and near water since childhood, according to the woman who raised her. Her daughter, Carly Ellsworth, told CBS News that Lynette was very fit and very strong, a good swimmer, someone who could not simply have fallen off a boat by accident. Those were not Carly's exact words, but they represent the meaning she conveyed, and they matter because they complicate the image of a passive victim overcome by random misfortune. Lynette's last Instagram post was on April 4th, 2026, the same day she disappeared. The caption said, in a phrase that carries a weight its author could not have anticipated, not going anywhere for a while, she had no idea. To understand the full context of what happened, or what is alleged to have happened, on the evening of April 4th, you need to understand the geography and the conditions that Brian Hooker described and that other witnesses assessed differently. The Hopetown area of the Bahamas, in the Sea of Abaco, is not an unfamiliar stretch of water to the people who spend time there. It is a place with a specific character, a specific set of conditions, a specific community of sailors and boat captains who know those waters with the kind of intimacy that comes only from extended time on them. Brian and Lynette were not strangers to those waters either. They were part of the cruising community there. They were known. They had anchored near other boats. They had neighbors on the water that night, including Captain Bill, who was anchored directly beside the Soulmate. Brian Hooker described the conditions on April 4th in specific terms across several different conversations with different people. In the recorded phone call to Marn and Blaine Stevenson, the call obtained by CBS News, he described what happened with a phrase that painted a specific picture of the conditions. He told them she basically just bounced off the dinghy in the middle of a little blow with something like 20-something knot winds that had popped up. He told them the sun had set basically 10 minutes after she fell over. In messages to his friend Daniel Danforth, also reviewed by CBS News, he said the wind blew him away from Lynette pretty quickly. Wind, darkness, currents. The weather is the structural support of his account. Without genuinely difficult and disorienting conditions, the account of a former United States Marine, a man with military training and years of sailing experience, who was unable to locate his wife in the water near him, requires different explanations. The weather is not incidental to his account. The weather is the account. If the conditions were severe and disorienting, then what he describes becomes at least plausible. If the conditions were not severe, the same account becomes considerably harder to understand. Captain Bill was anchored directly beside the Soulmate that night. Not in the general area, not somewhere nearby, directly beside it. He and his companions experienced whatever conditions existed in that specific anchorage on that specific evening. And his assessment, stated publicly and on the record, was that the weather in that area really was not that bad. Not the broader Bahamas, not some other anchorage, the specific area where the soulmate was anchored on the specific night of April 4th, 2026. The weather really was not that bad. A friend of the couple who spoke to Fox News Digital, choosing to remain anonymous, offered a different assessment and different context. He said that the winds in the Hopetown area were gusting around 26 knots based on his review of Fox weather data. And he said something that adds a layer of complexity to the question of why they were out on the water at all in those conditions. He described their dinghy as an 8-foot hard-bottom vessel with an electric motor, and he said that a dinghy of that type should not have been operated in conditions above 12 to 15 knots, that the boat was too small and underpowered for the conditions that existed that night. Two different people with two different perspectives on the same conditions. Captain Bill was physically present in those waters that night and said it was not that bad. The anonymous friend was not present, but argued based on weather data that the dinghy should not have been operating at all. Both statements are part of the documented public record. Neither resolves the core technical question that Captain Bill raised about the engine. Neither resolves what happened to Lynette Hooker. There is something else in the documented record that deserves careful and honest examination. Because the account of the lanyard itself, the account of this specific piece of equipment, and what it was doing and who was wearing it and how it functioned that night, is not consistent across the different things Brian Hooker said to different people. The official account shared by the Royal Bahamas Police Force described the situation this way. Lynette was wearing the engine safety lanyard when she fell. The police used the word wearing, an active state, a deliberate attachment. The lanyard on a person's body as that person went into the water. In the recorded phone call to the Stevensons, the call obtained and reviewed by CBS News, Brian described it differently. He said the dinghy key went over with her because it was not clipped to anything or anybody. He said she had the spare dinghy key in her dry bag, which was with her, not clipped to anything or anybody. Hold those two descriptions next to each other. The first says Lynette was wearing the lanyard. The second says it was not clipped to anything or anybody. These are meaningfully different descriptions of the same object in the same moment. If Lynette was wearing the lanyard, as the police account states, then the lanyard was attached to her, and when she went overboard, the cord pulled taut and disconnected from the switch, cutting the engine, exactly as the device is designed to function. If the lanyard was not clipped to anything or anybody, as Brian told the Stevensons, then the device did not function as designed. A lanyard that is not clipped to anyone does not trigger the switch when it enters the water. It simply falls. In that scenario, the engine would not have been cut by the lanyard mechanism. It would have continued running or stopped for an entirely different reason. Which description is accurate? Was Lynette wearing the lanyard, or was it not clipped to anything or anybody? This is a question with a single correct answer. It is a question that investigators, working with Brian's multiple recorded statements across different conversations with different people, have been actively examining. Jim Todd is a volunteer with the Hopetown Fire and Rescue Service. He helped bring Brian ashore on the morning of April 5th. He then went back out on the rescue vessel with Brian and police as searchers worked to find Lynette. He spoke to journalist Ashley Banfield on the program Drop Dead Serious. And what he said about that experience reflected a shift. He told Banfield that his understanding of the events changed profoundly as specific details emerged that had not been shared with searchers in the initial telling. Jim Todd is someone who has real experience in those waters. He is someone who knows, from practical experience, what a person in a motorized boat instinctively does when someone goes overboard in shallow, navigable water. His assessment of what the instinctive and automatic response to that situation looks like, absent panic and absent other compromising factors, was clear. You throw the anchor, you hold your position, you take the second life jacket, you enter the water. Interestingly, Brian Hooker told the Stevensons in that recorded phone call that he did throw the anchor. He said he yelled to Lynette that he had lost an oar, and then threw the anchor out and anchored the dinghy. An anchored boat is not drifting. An anchored boat is held in position by design. If the dinghy was anchored in the water near where Lynette went overboard, it was not moving. It was where it was. That detail, the anchor, appears in Brian's account of that night. And then there is Ken. Ken is the bartender at the Abaco Inn. He served Brian on the evening of April 4th, twice. He spoke to Fox News Digital, and he offered a geographic observation that is, in its plainness, worth sitting with for a moment. He said, with the matter-of-fact quality of someone simply stating a known physical reality about the place where he works, that the distance between the anchorage and Marsh Harbor was only 4 miles. He said that even floating, even without any propulsion at all, the crossing should have been considerably faster than the 8 to 10 hours that appear in the timeline of Brian's account that night. 4 miles, 8 to 10 hours, in conditions that the licensed boat captain anchored at the starting point described as not that bad. These questions, the kill switch lanyard and who was wearing it and whether the engine could have been restarted, the weather and the conflicting assessments from people with different proximity to the facts, the geographic distance and the time it took to cover it, the inconsistency between wearing the lanyard and not clipped to anything or anybody, the 8 to 10 hours on 4 miles of water in conditions described as manageable by someone who was there, none of these questions have been publicly resolved. Each of them is part of the documented record. None of them, individually, proves anything. Together, they form the shape of an investigation that has a great deal still to account for publicly. The investigators do not appear to be done, and the evidence they hold is substantial. CBS News reviewed a search warrant that revealed what authorities seized from the soulmate. The list of items taken as material evidence in a missing person case causing bodily harm included a digital video recorder, digital tablets, and cell phone-related equipment. These are the digital bones of a modern life lived at sea. 2 people who documented their journey publicly, who built a social media following around their sailing life, who communicated with friends and family through digital devices. They left a digital record, and investigators have it. There is also the Apple Watch. Lynette Hooker wore one. A United States Coast Guard officer confirmed to Darlene Hamlet, Lynette's 76-year-old mother, that Apple Watch data exists and is being analyzed. Modern Apple Watches collect an extraordinary amount of information: heart rate, movement, exercise tracking, emergency SOS capability, fall detection. The data stored on that device, if it was functioning, and if it was with Lynette when she entered the water, could contain information that is relevant to reconstructing what happened in ways that testimony alone cannot provide. There is also Brian's recorded phone calls, his text messages, his multiple accounts of the same evening given to different people in different contexts. Investigators have all of it, and as has been documented publicly, those accounts do not always align precisely with each other. The Royal Bahamas Police Force has been explicit about where the investigation stands. The commissioner confirmed to NBC News that Brian Hooker remains a named suspect in the investigation. He has not been cleared. The commissioner confirmed that he can be rearrested. This is the official posture of the investigative authority, with jurisdiction over the case. Brian Hooker has not been charged with any crime. His attorney, Terrell Butler, stated categorically and unequivocally that Brian Hooker denies all wrongdoing and has been cooperating with relevant authorities. His Michigan-based attorney, Crystal Marie Hauer, told ABC News that Brian Hooker never would have harmed his wife of 25 years and asked the public to give him the benefit of the doubt. These are his legal representatives speaking on his behalf. Their statements are part of the record. Brian's denial is part of the record. The presumption of innocence is a fundamental principle, and it applies fully here. He has not been charged. He has not been convicted. He is entitled to the presumption of innocence that every person in every case is entitled to until a court says otherwise. What also belongs in the record are the people who are waiting. Darlene Hamlet is 76 years old. She is in Florida. She has been waiting for a phone call that has not come, for news that has not arrived, for a resolution to an anguish that has no clean edges. She spoke to Ashley Banfield, and what she said was simple and devastating, in the way that real grief is always simple and devastating before it becomes complicated. She said she wanted nothing more than to hear that she is loved and to have her daughter come home. That is what remains at the center of this. An elderly woman waiting, a family fractured by absence, a life that was built around freedom and the sea and is now defined by a single night on the water. Carly Ellsworth flew to the Bahamas. She did not stay home and wait for phone calls. She went. She walked the shorelines where the cadaver dogs were working. She sat on the dock and looked at the soulmate, her mother's boat, the vessel named for the connection her mother believed she had found, and she spoke to the water. She said, "Hey Mom, I'm here, wherever you are." Those words, spoken to an absence, to a possibility, to whatever remains of her mother in those waters, are the human reality underneath every technical question about kill switch lanyards and manual override capability and weather conditions and drift times and conflicting accounts. Lynette called the ocean her happy place. She meant it. You do not quit your career and sell your house and give away everything you own and spend a decade on the water with someone because the ocean is somewhere you feel merely comfortable. You do that because the ocean is where you feel fully yourself. Lynette felt fully herself on the water, and on the water is where she went. And on the water is where she has not been found. There are people who think about this case and focus on the questions that remain open: the lanyard, the motor, the restart capability, the 8 to 10 hours over 4 miles, the not clipped to anything or anybody versus the wearing the lanyard, the weather that Captain Bill, anchored right there, said was not that bad. These are legitimate questions. They are documented. They are sourced. They belong in any honest examination of what is known and what is not yet known. There are other people who think about this case and focus on the grief of a man who says he lost his wife and has had to navigate that loss under public suspicion and legal scrutiny. Both perspectives exist in the public conversation around this case. Both are acknowledged here. What is not acknowledged here, what will not be stated here, is any conclusion about what happened on the water on the evening of April 4th, 2026. That conclusion belongs to investigators, to physical evidence, to whatever the Apple Watch data shows, to whatever the digital devices seized from the Soulmate contain, to whatever the dinghy and its motor reveal about whether that engine could have been restarted after the lanyard disconnected. The conclusion belongs to facts, not to speculation, and the facts are not yet fully public. Let us return, one more time, to the kill switch, because it is the question that sits at the center of this case in a specific and documentable way. Captain Bill raised it publicly, on the record. With his name attached, he was there. He said most outboard motors can be restarted manually without the lanyard reinserted. If the motor on Brian and Lynette's dinghy had that capability, and the investigators hold that motor and therefore hold the answer to that specific question, then the account of a permanently powerless boat paddled for 8 to 10 hours over 4 miles of not particularly severe conditions by an experienced former Marine and decade-long sailor requires a public accounting that has not yet been provided. The investigators have the motor. They know whether it can be restarted without the lanyard. They have not said publicly what they found. Their silence on this specific point is not an answer. It is a space where an answer belongs. Lynette Hooker was 55 years old. She gave up everything for the life she chose. She was fit and strong and had been around water her whole life. She baked cinnamon rolls in a solar oven and posted about sea turtles and sunsets. She texted her friend that she had given away everything she owned. She posted that she was not going anywhere for a while on the last day anyone publicly heard from her. She wore a watch that collected data. She went into the water on a night that a licensed captain, who was right there, called not that bad. She has not been found. She deserves every honest question asked openly, examined carefully, and answered with the same rigor that the documented evidence demands. She deserves the truth of what happened on that water. Her mother deserves the truth. Her daughter deserves the truth. The people who loved her, who knew her when she was a woman with a career and a house and a life, before she traded all of it for the ocean, they deserve the truth. The investigation continues. The Royal Bahamas Police Force and the United States Coast Guard both have active investigations. The investigators have the evidence. They have the motor and the lanyard and the digital devices and the Apple Watch data and the recorded calls and the text messages and the multiple accounts from the same man describing the same night in ways that do not always match. If you have any information about the disappearance of Lynette Hooker, the Royal Bahamas Police Force and the United States Coast Guard are the appropriate contacts. Both investigations remain active. Every tip, every detail, every piece of information that might clarify what happened in those waters could matter. Brian Hooker has not been charged with any crime. He denies any wrongdoing completely and categorically through his legal representatives. Every person named in this account is presumed innocent of any criminal conduct unless and until formally charged and convicted in a court of law. These are not caveats. These are legal and ethical requirements that belong in any honest telling of a story that touches on an active criminal investigation. What remains is the silence, the Marina silence, the kind that settles over the water at night when the engines are still, and the rigging hums low, and the boats sit at their moorings, and the Sea of Abaco moves the way it always moves, indifferent to the things that have happened in its waters and the things that may still need to be understood about the night of April 4th, 2026. Lynette Hooker has not been found. The investigation is open. The questions are documented. The evidence is held by people whose job is to find the truth of what happened and to pursue whatever that truth requires. Lynette called the ocean her happy place. She deserved to stay there, aboard the Soulmate, baking cinnamon rolls and watching sea turtles and posting sunsets. She deserved to come home when she was ready. She deserved a lot of things. She deserved the truth. And her family is still waiting for it. We will continue to follow this case as the investigation develops and as verified information becomes part of the public record. Every claim in this account is sourced. Every expert is named where named. Every witness is identified or explained where anonymity was their documented choice. The kill switch question belongs in the public record because Captain Bill put it there. The weather question belongs there because he addressed it there. The lanyard inconsistency belongs there because it exists in Brian's own documented statements across different conversations. The geographic and time questions belong there because they come from people who know those waters. None of these questions is an accusation. They are questions. And Lynette Hooker deserves every one of them asked and answered honestly. She deserves no less than the truth.